Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today I wanted to talk about the Tainted Divine Teardrop, one of the most obscure currency items in Path of Exile, but definitely something that if you're interested in learning a little bit about crafting, can make you a fair bit of currency if you play around with them. These tend to go up over a league, and you'll see here that this is its price trajectory during the Crucible expansion, and there was a big jump in price that took place on the 13th of May, when one of the people who's involved in a lot of mirror tier crafting decided that they wanted to have hundreds of these things to use on various projects in Standard, and so they started buying everything on the market, and in doing so pushed the price up. Tainted Divine Teardrops are exceedingly rare, even if you are focused heavily on Beyond content. You will not see these often at all, and in all the time that I've played Path of Exile, I've had exactly one of them drop ever. They have a number of uses, and one of the key things is that they can turn an item that's not particularly anything extraordinary into something that is. So these jewels are what I would term 3.5 perfect mod jewels. They have 35% increased effect as an explicit mod. This is incredibly good. They also have two other very good mods. For example, on the first one, you've got 6 to all attributes and 20 to maximum energy shield added to your small passives. And then they have a half a mod. So 4% chaos resistance. This is not ideal, it's not perfect, it's not exactly what you want, but it's also too good to roll over. And of course, this is on a mana reservation efficiency base. These cluster jewels are incredibly good, and I'm using them as an example of what extremely good cluster jewels look like, so that we can then compare to things that can be made through fortuitous RNG and Tainted Divine Teardrops and a little bit of trading. However, you can sometimes find similar items that have 25% instead of 35%, and that are already corrupted. And the origin story of these jewels is that they actually started out not as a rare cluster jewel or a magic or normal cluster jewel, but they started out as one of the unique cluster jewels. This one, for example, you can tell from the artwork, started out as Calamitous Visions, a not very good unique cluster jewel that grants Lone Messenger, which isn't in very much demand at the moment. And there's also Natural Affinity, there's Kitava's Teachings, there's lots of other ones of these. One of the things that can happen when you apply a Vaal Orb to a unique item, or also for that matter to a non-unique item, is what players term bricking the item. That turns it into a rare item with maximum mod count. Additionally, if that item is a cluster jewels always have an enchant on them, and so a random enchant is applied to the item as part of the bricking process. Now, that random enchant is important, because if that random enchant happens to hit 6% mana reservation efficiency and adds 3 passive skills, then you have a lot of potential for the item to be good. You can further craft these with Tainted Chaos Orbs and or Tainted Exalted Orbs, but what you're really hoping is for a case like what you see with Pandemonium Wound here, where the item happens to brick already having added small passive skills have 25% increased effect. Now, if you set up a live search on trade, you will occasionally find these, or alternately, if you're someone that knows a lot about cluster jewel crafting and some of the values of some of the oddball cluster jewels, then you can potentially buy a large number of these unique cluster jewels from other players, then apply Vaal Orbs to them all, and then work out what to do with each particular outcome that you get. In any case, an item like Pandemonium Wound is the perfect target for a Tainted Divine Teardrop. Because if you get quite lucky, and you do need to get quite lucky for these to be good, then you can end up with 35% increased effect and a couple of other tier 1 mods, at which point you are starting to look like having a 30 Divine Orb jewel. Of course, there's a lot of RNG involved because Tainted Divine Teardrops seem to do 3 things at random. They either increase the tier by 1, they decrease the tier by 1, or they leave it unchanged. There is actually no statistically significant samples that have been done that compare the rarity of these 3 events. It is my personal belief that all 3 of these options are equal in rarity. However, if a Tainted Divine Teardrop attempts to increase the tier when it's already at the maximum tier that could roll on that item, or to decrease the tier when it's already at the lowest, it will just do nothing. And so that's my belief from asking around a few people, but I genuinely cannot back that up with some example of a sample size of 200 of them that's been used that can actually show whether it is indeed 1 in 3, 1 in 3, 1 in 3, or whether it's something else, because those samples simply don't exist. Anyways, I wanted to put together a bit of a list of some of the other things you might want to consider using these on. So the first one is Cluster Jewels, which we've already discussed. And whilst I talked about 3 passive mana reservation efficiency ones with item level 84 or above as one option, it's not the only one that you could consider. You could also look at various other cluster jewels where there is a big difference between 25% increased effective passives and 35% increased effective passives. And the key thing here is that these tend to round down. So 6% mana reservation efficiency plus 25% is 7, 6% plus 35% is 8, and then they multiply because you get them a lot of times. Just remember that you cannot roll 35% increased effective passives on any cluster jewel that is item level 83 or lower, so don't bother corrupting your item level 83 and down cluster jewels trying to use a Divine Teardrop on them. It will end in Divine Tears. The next option is Minion Helms. So +1 to the level of all minion gems is easy enough to roll now since the changes to Minion Helms a couple leagues ago. It's weighted at 250 and it's something that you can then multiply that by 10 by the use of a bound fossil. However, rolling +2 even with a bound fossil is very hard. It's weighted at 25, which makes it 40 times rarer than tier 1 life. Now, getting +2 requires an item level of 75 or above, and Tainted Divine Teardrops cannot bypass this. Now, what's particularly good here is if you start out with an Elder influenced helmet base, and then you double corrupt it after rolling relevant mods, the right mods with the wrong tiers, then a Tainted Divine Teardrop can complete the item for you. If you are interested in getting into this market, one option that you've got is using a 4-socket resonator with bound, corroded, faceted, and sanctified fossils on Elder influenced helmets, high item level Elder influenced helmets that is. And then once you've got something that is the right mods at the wrong tier, take it to the corruption chamber, then use a Divine Teardrop. The reason that you're adding in corroded fossils there may not be obvious, but it's because it bans all of the various elemental mods, and there's a lot of elemental mods that can roll, some of which have their probabilities increased by the use of your faceted fossils as well. You also don't need to worry about getting your enchant now, because one of the other tainted currency items is the Tainted Blessing, and that's something that you can then apply at a later stage. So the next use case that I want to point out as an option is bows. Item level 86 plus bows have another one of these cases where there's a fantastic mod where the top tier is really good and the second tier is a lot worse and the top tier is much rarer. So item level 86 plus bows can roll +2 arrows to your bow attacks, but the lesser tier +1 arrow mod is 10 times as common. Again, it's the same pattern. Another item with a very tier sensitive mod that's way better at the top tier than the low tier. It's tough here though, as the other mods on your bow are important too. But bows that are pretty good and that have +1 arrow on them drop often enough in Enchanted Armament's Grand Heist that I think it's quite reasonable to look for those sorts of bows on the market. And then when one comes up, you can then apply a corruption or a double corruption even to it. And then you can attempt to hit it with Tainted Divine Teardrops. If you do succeed in hitting it, you could end up with a true monster of a weapon. That said, in the Crucible expansion specifically, this is a little bit weaker than it would normally be. It's still an option, but it would be better in other environments. Next we have Caster Staves. Now if you can source a Caster Staff that has +2 to the level of all skill gems, and it also has +1 or +2 to a class of gems, for example, +1 to the level of all fire skill gems, and +2 to the level of all skill gems, this is a prime Divine Teardrop candidate because you can chase an upgrade from +1 or +2 to a class of gems into +3 instead. And that's only one tier upgrade, even if it's currently at 1. Now remember that you want to get a veiled suffix on these items, as veiled suffixes are untiered. So they can't downgrade when you apply a Tainted Divine Teardrop because there's no lower tier version for them to roll into. Additionally, you can apply a Harvest enchant to your staff, then you can safely corrupt it by using the Beastcraft recipe that sets an item's quality to 30% and also corrupts it. This is a safe way to use Divine Teardrops because you don't run any risk of destroying the mods that are on your staff when you use a Vaal Orb on it. You can just bypass that by making it corrupted via other means. Vaal implicits on Staves are actually not very good at all for casters, and so there's no real opportunity cost to doing this. You would be better off doing the Harvest enchant and then the 30% corruption. Next, there's two things I want to point out about physical weapons that you can use. There is a big jump between tier 3 physical percent and tier 2 physical percent, because tier 3 has a large roll range. If you get a weapon that has tier 3 physical percent, it gains a lot from upgrading to tier 2, and your goal here is to have a starting point like tier 3 physical percent, tier 1 or tier 2 flat physical, and tier 1 or tier 2 attack speed, and ideally a hybrid physical percent / accuracy mod. Now again, this is not really worth it in the Crucible League specifically, but it's something that's useful to keep in mind for future leagues. In the current Crucible expansion, it's generally better to focus on improving your Crucible tree rather than improving the explicit mods, as that will generally provide you more power than any of these sorts of more specialized crafts. There is also another option for physical weapons with Incursion items. There are items that have the Incursion Tacati's mod, which grants tier 1 physical damage, as well as a percentage of physical damage added as chaos as a hybrid mod. Now if you can find one of these with a tier 2 attack speed and space for a flat physical from a Benchcraft, or something similar to that, then this is definitely worth throwing a Benchcraft on it, throwing a corruption at it, and then if the corruption hits hard, then and only then do you pull out the Tainted Divine Teardrops. Because Tainted Divine Teardrops are so rare and not cheap at all, you only want to use them on the best use cases. The final thing I want to point out is one option that you've got with Grasping Mails. So Grasping Mails are acquired by selling 60 Breach Rings to the vendor, and then they will give you back a Grasping Mail base, which is an objectively bad Strength, Dex, and Intelligence hybrid armor base. It's strictly worse than a Sacrificial Garb, but when you identify a Grasping Mail that has come directly from this vendor recipe, it will often have mods you can't get anywhere else, and while some of these are rubbish, some of them are very, very good. Now, if you get a Grasping Mail from this vendor recipe and its mods are quite good, one of the ways that people sometimes try to improve them further is through the use of a Conqueror's Exalted Orb, something like a Redeemer's Exalted Orb. Now, if your Conqueror Exalt hits the right mod at the wrong tier, for example, if you roll a tier 2 version of the Redeemer's Aura Effect mod on a genuinely good Chayula Defense's Grasping Mail, then in this situation, Divine Teardrops are a risky but powerful way to further improve that item. Now, one thing that's important is that there are complex interactions between the Tainted Divine Teardrop and crafted mods. What happens here is that with the Tainted Divine Teardrops, there are some crafted mods that have multiple tiers. Those ones can change tiers. For example, if you have tier 1 single elemental lightning resistance on an item, and that is from the bench mod, then a Tainted Divine Teardrop can change that to a different tier of Benchcrafted lightning resistance, or it can leave it as it is at tier 1. However, there are a lot of Benchcrafted mods you learn through the Betrayal system that do not have multiple tiers. For example, there is the popular Gravicious craft, which causes a percentage of physical damage your character suffers to instead be converted to lightning, and also another percentage to be converted to fire. These ones don't have a lower tier version, and as a result, if you get that on your Grasping Mail, it's actually pretty safe. It's not going to get down tiered by a Tainted Divine Teardrop. So there's some complex interactions there that will influence some of your decisions that you make. However, it is important to say that all of these options with Tainted Divine Teardrops on Grasping Mails do compete with the option of using Eldritch Annuls, Eldritch Exalted Orbs, and Eldritch Chaos Orbs to craft them instead. I generally prefer the approach of doing the Eldritch crafting instead, but Redeemer Exalts or other Conqueror's Exalted Orbs will sometimes be the right call, and if they are the right call, then that's worth your while keeping in mind. Now, there is one important corner case here that has changed over time. It used to be the case when 3.16 first went live and Tainted Divine Teardrops were added to the game. There was a brief window where you could apply a Tainted Divine Teardrop, and that could actually upgrade a mod that was a tier 1 influence mod into a tier 0 elevated influence mod. This is absolutely no longer the case now. There is a GGG patch note confirming that that was not ever intended and that it has been removed. So, you will not be able to elevate mods using this strategy. However, if you have a mod that is already elevated, you will risk downgrading it to the non-elevated version. So basically, the Tainted Divine Teardrop does not play well with mods that require an Orb of Dominance in order to roll. As well, I'm talking here about Grasping Mails specifically, but this also all applies to the use of delve-specific mods, some of which are very, very good as well. There's a number of drop-only items that come from the Delve Mines. I made a video earlier this week that I'll link to down in the description below about the physical damage taken as Chaos helmets that are extremely good on Chaos Inoculation builds at the high end. And those are another example where you may decide that the right thing to do is use a Tainted Divine Teardrop in order to finish crafting an item, especially if you wind up again with the right mods at the wrong tiers, and you've got this mod whose tier won't change by the application of Tainted Divine Teardrop. Anyway, that's some discussion on Tainted Divine Teardrops, one of the rarest currency items in Path of Exile at the moment, but definitely something that is worth your while considering if you're in Trade League. And a reminder that if you're playing in solo self-found, these things are so rare you probably won't have access to them unless you very, very determinedly farm beyond content, and even then you won't have access to many of them, and so I wouldn't make any plans around them. If you do get one, fantastic, use it on one of these use cases that works for your build. But if you don't get one, then that's going to be the norm for most people. These are definitely a Trade League tool. That's all I got on these. May your Tainted Divine Teardrops have interesting results, and I will see you around.